My name's Connie Bowen. I'm the Director of Innovation at AgLaunch, and I am joined here by Michael Ott, CEO and founder of Rantizo. And we are going to talk a little bit about, maybe a lot, about data usage and ownership, and kind of really take a farmer-centric view of all of the kind of big questions about what we do with data, who gets to get value from it, et cetera, et cetera. But first, before we get too into that, I want to make sure everyone has some context on who we are, who our organizations are, and one of the kind of projects we're working on together that has us talking about this a lot. So I am going to pass it to Michael to introduce himself and his company first. So Michael, want to introduce us to Rantizo and tell us what you're doing?
Sounds very good. And I thought I'd go through a couple of quick slides just to show like a little 5-minute overview of where we are and what we're doing. So I'll share my screen here. So at Rantizo, we're a drone spraying company based in Iowa City. And a lot of people say that drone spraying is the future of agriculture, and we argue that they're wrong. It's the present, as Rantizo is currently operating in 18 states. We're licensed, approved, and ready. We're spraying on label, legally, with insurance, and all the proper permits that are required. So we're actually doing this out in the field right now, which is a pretty exciting thing. And obviously, when you're doing something this precise, there's a lot of data that's changing hands, and you need to track and transfer that in a smart way. So farmers deal with a lot of issues. One of them that's pretty that you can't control is rain. So when you get stuck in the mud, here you see a $200,000 tractor pulling out a $400,000 sprayer. That's $600,000 of equipment not working simply because it rained. Here's an equally muddy situation where our drone gets up and above the crop and sprays. And so what you can see here, that was a very muddy field. It was also too close to an airport for a plane to be able to do it. And it was an insecticide that makes your lips go numb. So none of the employees would backpack spray it. So that shows all the different situations that came to make drone spraying the best opportunity. With that, we did 1 acre in 1 hour the very first time we sprayed. Now we're doing about 14 acres an hour. That's spraying with a 14-foot boom with a 20-foot swath going precisely through the field. And we're able to go exactly where we intend to be. There's a lot of data that's required to show that. And I'll give you an example of how we know we're exactly where we want to be. Because in this instance, we were doing a fungicide application, and I'll argue that you shouldn't apply fungicide to the outer rows because that's typically a wasted chemical. Your yields are going to be down there because wildlife will come in and eat that. You're not really going to get a big benefit from fungicide on the absolute edges. An insecticide spray, contrary, you definitely should hit the edges. But we'll show how we're able to prove that out. So what we did was we went into 7-foot tall corn last September and sprayed it with a fluorescent dye that shows up with black light. And we're able to show that I'm in exactly the row that I intend to be in, covering it top to bottom all the way over. I'm going to go 1 row next to it, and you see the dramatic drop off, but there's still some drops there on that leaf. 1 more row over, and there's basically nothing there. So we're able to show that we're spraying precisely where we intend to be, and importantly, not where we don't want to be. So we're getting top to bottom coverage exactly where it is. Now, Rantizo is unique because we have the opportunity to swarm, flying multiple drones at once. So we're the only people in the country that are doing this legally. So we're able to get into any rural area nationwide and fly 3 drones at one time autonomously through the field. And just to give you some frame of reference on what we're covering, with 1 drone, we're at about 14 acres an hour. These are all quoted at 3 gallon per acre rates. With a drone in our mix and fill, which I'll talk about in a second, that reloads it faster, gets you up to about 20. A 3 drone swarm will do 32 acres an hour, and 3 of them with a mix and fill will do about 45. And that's about your true application rate of a tractor. Everyone counts while you're actually spraying. Maybe you're covering 60 70 acres an hour, that's when you're actually spraying. But if you factor in the time to get to the field and the true usage, most ag retailers will say you're in that 40 to 50 range for a tractor. And that's right about where we are. So what we're able to show is when you've got an issue in a field, say you've got 3 problems, I'll bring my mouse up to show, if you've got an insect problem here, a weed problem there, and a fertilizer deficiency, the normal pathway is to put insecticide, herbicide, and fertilizer and spray the whole field. So you're spraying this area that doesn't need it, you're spraying this area that doesn't need it. And importantly, you're spraying herbicide on these insects, you're spraying fertilizer on these weeds, and you're spraying insecticide where you need fertilizer. So you're wasting those inputs. What we're able to do is go precisely to those locations and optimally apply them right there. I'll talk quickly about our technology because this is a data-focused discussion. So we have a hardware and software platform. On the hardware side, we're using drones, giving them an upgrade, mix and fill, and I'll walk through that here quickly. So we take a DJI spray drone, which is a fantastic drone, and we strip all the spraying components off, and we go from 6 acres an hour to 14 acres an hour. And that's with our expanded boom, and then with our better pumps and better workflow, better check valves, we're actually able to fly much faster. So we're covering a wider area, and then also flying about 15.5 miles an hour as opposed to 5 or 6 miles an hour. We automate everything. So we're looking to automate the uploading of shape files, which is obviously a data transaction, automate all the different processes. So we want to standardize everything so it's consistently excellent at all times. And this really addresses the labor shortage that most ag retailers are seeing. And then when we do repeat applications, say we go to a vineyard that needs the same thing sprayed every 2 weeks, we program that in the first time. Maybe it takes 15 minutes, maybe it takes 35 minutes, depending how complicated it is. The second through 20th time, it takes 10 seconds to pull up that field and go from there. We can do dry applications like cover crop seeds, pollen, beneficial insects, different granular fertilizers. This mix and fill system actually integrates with imagery providers, so we can pull in data from them and then understand what the problems are and then mix up precise batches. So we'll be tracking, all right, here's where your issue is. We need a herbicide and drift control mix to go on the eastern edge of this field. We can track all of that and be very precise with what we're deploying. And then when we get to the middle of the field where maybe there's a fertilizer deficiency, we're just spraying some fertilizer, foliar feed right there. So that's a way to track all that, obviously with data going through there. We're developing the Rantizo software suite, rolling out an app for our contractors here in the next couple of weeks, and then for the general public, for end users by the end of the middle part of the season. So that will be able to track your job, show other things that are going on there. And then we also sell trailers, which basically contains everything that is needed. So it's truly a turnkey service that we're selling to ag retailers with a goal of helping them leverage data, utilize their precision division much more efficiently. And I'll wrap up quickly just showing you where we are right now. So each state with a logo has is where we're permitted, and the small ones are where we have contractors working. So you see we're slowly but surely filling up the country, and we're expanding pretty rapidly. Just hired a sales guy in Indiana, and then another one in Boise, Idaho. So we're going to be, he's on his 3rd day. And then we're actually currently looking for someone in that mid-south, maybe Memphis area as well. So those are high level of what we're doing, and happy to jump in and talk more about the data side and what else is going on.
Thanks a bunch, Michael. And just to the audience, I'm going to give a quick overview of the data commons here, but as you've got questions, please throw them in the Q&A and we will get to them. We're going to have more kind of an intersectional discussion, and let me give you some context for where exactly that intersection is here. So I'm just going to give you a quick kind of tour of the project that AgLaunch is working on, which is what we call the data commons. And as a kind of a point of context here, Rantizo is a company that works with AgLaunch, and AgLaunch is essentially a farmer network. We exist to drive farms into kind of the future of farming and ensure that technology is serving farmers, and both old and new and incoming, and ensure that farming can be better in the future in all of the ways that we always talk about at all of these ag events. And so as a result of kind of some of the projects we've conducted, so AgLaunch is based in Memphis, Tennessee. I actually sit in St. Louis, Missouri, but was down on some of our farms last week with some of our startups. And we have a pretty broad range of a network. We work in the Delta region. We've got farmers pretty concentrated in Tennessee, but we've also got a partnership with Ag Ventures Alliance in Iowa. So we've got a number of farmers in our network there. And we've also got kind of an expansion group in Oregon's Willamette Valley. So pretty diverse group. And one of our core activities that we engage in is field trials. We work with AgTech startups, pretty early stage, but sometimes a little later stage. And we conduct commercial field trials with our farmers, and we do so in such a way that ensures that farmers are getting compensated for the work and time and effort and brain power they put into it. And so everything we do is about making sure that farmers are kind of steering what is happening. And so that has kind of made apparent some issues in terms of early stage tech adoption and even the step before adoption, but working with early stage tech companies. And one of those things is this interoperability challenge. It's really a pain to deal with data, especially when you've got, if you're a farmer and you're running a trial, let's say every season with a new startup, you run into this really annoying problem where you've got some guy who doesn't really know a ton about necessarily your farm or what kind of data you're tracking, who is asking for you to put essentially the same information into their new system that is probably not that much more than a spreadsheet. And you've got to spend all this time, and time is money, like inputting and translating and understanding kind of how to interacting with these new startups and getting them enough information that they can actually iterate and develop their technology. And so that gave birth to the data commons, which turns out to be a heck of a lot more, solving a heck of a lot more than just that one problem. So the data commons is it's solving a lot of problems. But getting on kind of like a macro level, well, let me tell you what it is first. So the data commons is essentially a pool of data. I think that Chris talked about this. If you guys weren't able to attend the earlier session, I recommend going back and watching it. But if you did attend, your head is probably swimming when you think about how the heck can interoperability possibly happen, and how can you possibly make and deal with making all of the decisions related to having different technologies on farms by different providers. It's kind of mind-blowing when you start to think about it. He talked a little bit about data lakes too, but without getting into jargon, I'm going to try to keep the jargon free. The data commons is just a big pool of data. It's owned, governed, operated by the AgLaunch Farmer Network, and it is pooled together, but within the pool, there are essentially buckets on a per farm basis. So farmers completely control their data. And there are a number of interesting things we can start to do with that. And it integrates data from both startups in the AgLaunch network with whom we work and the bigger companies like My John Deere, Platform, Climate, all that sort of thing. So it quickly gets pretty complicated. We're solving some macro issues here too. This is, to my knowledge, the first kind of data commons or data cooperative of its kind, although if there are other ones, I'd love to hear about it, reach out to me. And we're addressing actually a lot of issues that are slowing the adoption of ag technology. As you can, there's a great report that Farm Journal Initiative put together in 2019, actually, that shows how low satisfaction is, that shows how few farmers are actually collecting and collecting data using software. And we want to get that number up so we can drive more adoption. So we think you can only do that if you look in a farmer-centric way. So the way that this data commons essentially works is, like I said, we've got this big cloud of secure data. The number one thing we worked on in 2019 when we were kind of building the architecture for this was our security basis. And we can put data into the commons in a couple of different ways. We can get it from farms, we can get it from startups. Something that's really core there, and what we'll really mostly talk about today, is this relationship you can see at the bottom between the startup and the farm. The data commons functions most effectively if the startup and the farm have a very clear understanding of who gets to do what with the farm's data, and we're viewing it as the farm's data. So I'll get to ownership in a second and why that gets confusing. I think Michael and I will talk about that a bit. And there's some really interesting future applications as this pool of data gets larger, in terms of potentially being able to solve problems that our farmers have using this kind of compiled anonymized data, and essentially spinning out companies or solutions that have value both for solving problems on farm, but then have value in the market as companies. But that's way down the road, but it paints a picture of what's possible here. So yeah, but I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to discuss more with Michael. I do encourage, if this is an interesting issue to you, that you read this farmer perspectives on data trust, because it's pretty important to understand your customer and where they really are. So like I said, we give control. We also have to work with startups. So one of the things we're mostly, this is what we're going to talk about here mostly for the next couple of minutes, but we are trying to figure out the balance between a startup or a private company's need to create value from farm data and use that data for things like marketing or selling products or whatever it is, and the right to privacy for that farmer. And of course, there has to be trust in the middle there. So AgLaunch creates this kind of insulated environment where we kind of have this inherent trust because we've very intentionally built this network over years. But we're trying to figure out right now, is there some way that we can have kind of a template that is shared with everyone? So essentially kind of an open source or Creative Commons style open source template of here's what we recommend new startups do with their data, and how they kind of arrange their privacy policies, data use agreements, and how they convey that to their farmer customers. And yeah, and really quickly, just I'm a picture person, so it's helpful to paint a use case here. As an example of how our data commons currently functions, one of our portfolio companies, Shepherd, is a work management platform. So they take in a ton of data inputs through essentially the entire farm workforce. And some of that, such as field shapes, is useful to other companies in our portfolio. So as an example, we have had this particular company work with Mid-South Family Farms, got a lot of data from them, pushed it to the data commons. Scott, who's the farmer who runs Mid-South Family Farms, said, okay, I give permission to push that data to EarthSense as well. And we saved a step, essentially, saved a couple of exports of CSV files and whatnot. So that's a little bit about the data commons. I'm gonna stop sharing here. And now I want to kind of get more into a conversation. I see that we have a lot of questions here, but I'm gonna start with kind of recentering us on the conversation between Rantizo and a group like a data commons or a group of farmers and kind of farmer data usage. So yeah. I want to push this back to you, Michael. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you're looking at your strategy thought process around data usage?
Yeah, and I'll be upfront that our process is evolving. I know what I don't know, and that's a lot. We're understanding the value of what we're doing. We're putting together storage opportunities. We're basically capturing a massive amount of data in terms of where we are, what the pest is, what is used to treat it, how that affects things in the field, and then we've got a mess of things that we're trying to do, and so we're still figuring it all out. Is the short thing. We do have pretty clear policies on ownership, because I think that's an easy, good place to get started. So obviously we're in lockstep with most of people in the industry. The end user owns all of their data. That's very clearly spelled out in our contracts. We do have the right to access that. We have the right to improve our processes based on it. We don't share it without permission. That's something that we're still learning through how this is going to come together. But we see it as, one, a massive opportunity, and two, a massive responsibility, because as you want to work with people and build things out, you have to have trust. And it's you've seen horror stories from other startups that weren't doing things the right way, or even had the perception of not doing things the right way. So we want, obviously, both. So that's something just to get overarching, that we're figuring it out and learning from there.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Great. This is like a fun conversation, I hope, because we're all no one has quite figured this out yet. And something that I'm going to try to integrate. I know there's a lot of questions in the chat. I'm going to try to integrate some of these into this conversation. So Tina, I see your question on allyship to Black farmers and underrepresented farmers. And that's something that I'm not going to get too much in the weeds, because I could talk a long time, but we have a number of different programs there, and feel free to email me. We can chat more about it. But what I want to kind of relate that to this is, farms are not all the same. Farmers are not all the same. Data types are not all the same. I think someone asked me the other week, like, will we ever have a single set of standards for interoperability for ag? And I laughed because that's just
that'd be awesome.
It would be, but
I would invest in that company.
Crazy.
Yeah. So there's a few companies that are trying to standardize things. So you've got Leaf, you've got AGI, the Canadian version of AGI that's owned by TELUS. Others that are making it so that you can basically have one-stop shop to work with all the different groups, climate, deer, AgCo, everything else that's coming in there. So there's a big thing to be said for that interoperability. That's excellent. What we're looking at right now as a strategy, rather than creating APIs with every individual company, which can be done moderately expensively, and then it's super expensive to maintain all of those. Mm-hmm. So we're going to, you basically have an output that's an email, probably of a shapefile in one of a few common formats, and we can just take that shapefile in. So we're solving for that now with a semi-manual process, and then we're automating that as it goes. Because what we want are like a boundary shapefile. That's really helpful for us. If someone has a prescriptive shapefile, that's excellent. But once again, it comes down to having common terms, common file formats, and there's about 4 or 5 that we use that they work 95% of the time. So that's something that we're always also open with, like, this should be, a 3-minute shapefile update integration. Sometimes it's 25 minutes. But if you're just open with people and tell them, like, hey, we're figuring this out. And then once we do it 3 times, okay, now we know it. It's all dialed in and locked in and ready to go.
Yeah, right. No, we have a similar. One of our challenges with interoperability is we use an ontological model that is open source. You can go to our GitHub page. But what we're trying to, I am not, to be clear, I am not the engineer building this. So that's about as deep as I'm going to get technically. But one of the challenges is you've kind of got to pick a place to start. Yep. And this is where you get into the complications with diverse types of farms and changing types of farms, where we've got 1-acre farmers in our urban farmer network, all the way to our big row crop conventional guys across the Mid-South and Iowa. And obviously that's and then even Michael, you've got the challenge of you're servicing high value specialty crops and you're servicing row crops. And that is a fundamentally different kind of customer base that has actually value in, there's just different, it makes sense to look at data differently, and the relationship between data is a bit different. But without, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about who owns, well, first of all, about data ownership and kind of the complexity of that term in of itself. So I'm just going to throw out a definition or an issue with the looking at data in an ownership centric view. We try sometimes in ag to think about data as a commodity, but it's so relational that it really can't be thought of as that. And also it's so kind of clonable that it can't really be thought of as that. So we talk about, and AgLaunch talks a lot about, the farmer owns the data, but what does that actually mean? And at least in our context, it means we govern the decisions made with the data when it's an aggregate, but on an individual basis, we're kind of working with a bunch of Rantizos essentially, who ultimately get to decide what their data policy is going to be. Yeah, and then within that, let me quickly explain. I think you're gonna have to talk about primary and secondary data here, Michael. And what I mean by that for everyone is primary data is the stuff that's on the sensors. It's the stuff that you put into a form or an app. So it hasn't gotten transformed at all. And then secondary data will be more of the kind of, the startup has started to work their magic, run algorithms or whatnot, and give that some meaningful insight, and you can kind of level up from there with aggregators of multiple, yeah. So Michael, could you talk a little bit about, we've had this conversation specifically, like marketing and using data for marketing is a really key issue, right? When
Sure.
I go to talk to farmers, they might not want you to use their data for marketing, but they also might not care.
Yeah.
Tell me how you're looking at it.
Well, it's an interesting setup. So what we're able to see is, say you've got water hemp, a common weed that sometimes can be resistant. So you've got that in your field and you sprayed your field with Roundup and then realized, oh, I still have water hemp. 2 weeks later, it should have died, but it must be Roundup resistant water hemp. So then Rantizo could come in with our drones and say, all right, we're going to spray this with a herbicide with a different mode of action. And so we'll fly just to those spots where we've identified the Roundup resistant water hemp. Boom, we can treat that. Excellent. Everybody's happy. We've got a useful data point. So we said, okay, here's where the water hemp is. We know it's Roundup resistant. So then the question comes, 200 yards away in a neighbor's field, we also see water hemp. It's like, it's very likely to be the same Roundup resistant water hemp. Can we market to them, hey, you've got this issue, you've probably seen it in your imagery. When it comes to spraying that, I've got a pretty strong feeling that Roundup is not going to be the thing that kills that. Would you like us to provide the service? So there's value there for everyone. Some people see that as, well, you're taking what you learned from farmer 1 to farmer 2. Yes, but I'm going to eventually use that same methodology to help farmer 1 in the future. So am I profiting from their data? Somewhat. Yes, I am. But I'm also providing a service that can't be provided any other way. So how do you take that? And as the startup that's doing the application, we obviously have a bias in the game of what we want to do. But I understand that someone could say that and make a valid argument. Yeah, I'm profiting from their data and from what I've learned. And that's a thing that we look at it as data as like a charcoal briquette. So everybody has one, they're bringing one to the party, you put them all together, you have a bonfire, you cook food, it's great. If I've just got one, great, I've got one little briquette that I'm not going to do anything with. So to a certain extent, there's value in putting it together, and we want to make sure that we're encapsulating everything there and making sure that everyone gets paid, because there's value in that, but I know we haven't figured it out yet, and I'm not aware of anyone else that has, but we want to keep learning.
I really like that analogy. I might have to start using that. Yeah, we've got a little bit more. We might be able to have a barbecue with the AgLaunch data comments soon. The other thing I want to get in, and I want to make sure, Greg just asked a good question that we're going to get to in a second. I'm going to throw it to you, Michael. But first, I want to talk a little bit about your relationship. A lot of concern, and like I referenced that Farm Journal Trust and Ag kind of study on farmer concern around data, and that's like a lot of this is emotional. it's not necessarily based in an understanding of how data works, because not everyone is a data nerd, and so they don't understand what it means. And so one thing that has to be overcome is just this, like, there's inherently some platforms that farmers don't trust.
Yeah.
And it's because at some point that company did something. And so with you've got Bayer on your, so Bayer's an investor in Rantizo, which is great from some level in terms of having an ability to truly expand and scale. But it also has the potential to create mistrust. So maybe talk a little bit how if you've had issues directly with customers with that, or how you're now.
Absolutely. So just to give people a frame of reference, Rantizo did a Series A fundraise that closed in November of last year. We raised $7.5 million. Bayer was the lead investor, so they had a much smaller portion of that. So they are definitely an owner of the company in a fractional way. So that's great because it gives us access to a lot of the things that they can do in formulations, in terms of digital, in terms of trials and testing. There's a lot of great things that are coming out of that. There is obviously the perception of, oh, are we doing just what they want? Are we funneling them information? To the point of, we had a call with one of their largest competitors, and they said, well, can we work with you or not? Are you just giving all this information? And just be super clear, we are a standalone entity doing our own thing, doing we're acting in Rantizo's best interest. So it's not in our interest to share any information that shouldn't be shared. So we're definitely a standalone group that has investment from others, just like everyone else is. Everyone should act in their own self-interest. That's how the world works. So that's a great thing to be clear about. In doing our due diligence, we discovered, and this is a thing that actually Bayer pushed us to do, which was great, is we didn't have a clear data policy. And we had done things up until end of last summer with like, yeah, data's data, we'll figure it out. And they're like, nope, you need clearly, and this is the industry standard. And so we went along with that. So that was actually, it pushed us to do things that way. And I will say, to Climate's benefit, learned about this, they are not selling data. They say that very clearly, and they are definitely not doing that. That's counter to what a lot of people think. But I've learned that through some conversations where I was like, I don't know about that, but that is actually the case. And I've seen instances where they've left value on the table because they're not selling data. So someone like that, we want to have a similar policy of understanding what's the best thing to do. And then as we figure out our monetization strategy, understand what the best opportunities are and be as clear and upfront as we can. But you're right, everyone talks, everyone's got opinions, sometimes informed. I'm guilty of that too, but we want to be clear about that, and it's good to have the chance to address it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so interesting because anyway, yeah, everyone has an opinion. It's very difficult once. It's like anything else. You're either an Apple person or you're a Microsoft person, right? Yep. And there's a lot of anti-climate people out there.
Oh, sure. And we want to work with everyone. I mean, we're a startup. We're working with all the different chemical companies, doing different formulation work, doing different trials. Like, it's in our interest to be open. So it's great to have partnerships, but you can't be too strongly allied with one group or the other, because it's a fragmented market. So we need to be able to work with everyone. So we're deliberately agnostic about many, many things of what's the best. Well, what's the market using? All right, it's 2 or 3 different similar things. We'll be able to work with all those different similar things.
Absolutely. Changing tunes a little bit, because I want to make sure we answer questions. We've got about 10 minutes here. So folks, if you've got additional things, throw them in. I'm super intrigued by your answer to this one, Michael. Greg asks, and if people want to actually be unmuted and ask a question out loud, feel free to raise your hand and we'll get to you if we can. But Greg asks, DHS has issued a security advisory about DJI drones with concerns about their use by police departments and utilities, among other critical infrastructure users. The issues may not be as relevant in ag. In general, how does cybersecurity factor into data transmission and storage on the common platform? Oh, I guess that's kind of for me. We'll let you go first, though, on drones.
Yeah. So DJI drones have an interesting feature in that they can be grounded because there are no-fly zones that pop up. So you want a no-fly zone around an airport. If you're having the Super Bowl, you want a no-fly zone. So in order to do that, you have to have the ability to communicate back and forth. So you can constantly update that, because that's an ongoing changing thing. So that's why that exists. So in all the consumer drones, there are ways for that to communicate back, and that's absolutely necessary. People have some concerns about that. Some of those are valid, some are not. The real answer is pretty much all of your devices are sending information back to the people that made them, your Apple computer, your iPhone, your HP printer, your DJI drone. So that's a similar thing that's happening basically everywhere in every device. So that's how that goes. With an agricultural spray drone, which is not a consumer product, this is something that we have a dedicated a line set up. We have know your customer rules, because you could definitely do damaging things with an agricultural spray drone if you used it in a nefarious way. So it's in our interest, and we talk to the FBI every 6 months or so and know who all the drones are sold to, what they're being used for, and where they're being used. There's FAA that tracks that, and we're aware of that. So all those things need to happen, and we actually have the ability to see what the drones are doing, where they were, what was going on. So that's important, and that's where that data has to be known and has to be collected and organized by someone. So there's good reasons for all of that. Where it's shared on the back end, that can be problematic, and I can't speak to what's happening on the consumer side, but I know exactly what's happening on the agricultural side, and I know it's being watched by people that need to watch it and not shared with those that don't. So there's a long answer there, but that is an important thing to note.
Yeah, no, it's super critical. And I guess as cybersecurity relates to the commons that we're building, at least, it's our number one concern. I'll say, again, not the technical person. I'm not actually building it. I would be so happy, Greg, if you wanted to connect you to Alex, our lead engineer on this. But this has been our first and foremost priority. What I can speak more to is kind of the governance of how we make higher level decisions about prioritizing security. And I was joking with Mike before the session. I was listening to last year's CyberAg forum just last week to kind of refresh here. And in listening to one of the speakers from last year talk about cyber risks cybersecurity risk factors as relates to agriculture and even biosecurity, I was really like, I think we really need to bring in some more expertise here. So feel free to reach out if you're interested. Where we're at in terms of establishing formal governance for our data commons is, again, it's owned by, we've got an entity of farmers in AgLaunch who pool equity in different startups. They make investments in startups, and they also own the data commons. And so right now we've got a couple of farmers as kind of, and then our tech team essentially as the guiding governance, essentially an informal board at this stage of the game. We're in that kind of very early startup stage, I suppose, for the data commons. But what the step that we're at right now, or just stepping into, is figuring out external advisors and how that's going to have to, as we think about things like handling geospatial data and the most economic way to store that and manipulate it, we probably need to bring on a cyber security kind of advisory component too. So my door's open. Feel free to reach out. Then let's see. I'm going to skip around to get to questions. Let's see. I know I saw. Okay. So Janet, I'll answer your question, or ask Michael to answer your question. Is any data collected through employees' personal devices? And if so, well, I can answer this too. If so, how should farmers make sure employees consent to share this data? Mike, I'll let you answer for Rantizo, then I'll go a little broader.
So no, the short answer is no. We don't collect data through a personal device.
Never through a phone?
What's that?
Never through a phone?
So you would run the app through the phone, but I guess that wouldn't, I wouldn't say that's a personal device. That's usually provided by someone. So yeah, we want to be clear about that. Like, I don't have any interest in that or need to know any of that. So
yeah, that's fair. No, I mean, but Janet, that's a really good point as relates to some of the more workforce management focused kind of applications. And yeah, if you're relying on someone's app or iPad, you get into this now blurry world of a lot of people do use their personal devices for work and maybe get part of it paid. And so, and I know I've got some farm management experience wherein we use T-sheets, but we did actually track our employees. And so that's a great question. And it's not super clearly answered at this point in time by most folks.
Yeah.
So we're working on it. And that's where, like I said, we're kind of making sure we've got the right people at the table at this stage of the game. Let's see, I think we might have answered most of our questions.
Yeah, things like stripping from personal info, we definitely want to do that. There's no need for that. Like we need in our database to know what the farm was, where it was, who's the like all that. But anything that would go out, it's easy and smart to clean that up. There's no need for anyone to see any of that, and no one likes being spammed, so we want to be sure that we aren't doing that.
If you can handle one more quick question before we have to adjourn to the next session, that would be great.
Sure.
I saw one from Corinne asking if the Rantizo is offered as a product or a service. We sell our product to ag retailers and then they deliver the service. That's how our model works. And so we have data agreements with them as part of the overarching process there.
So Connie and Mike, I know there are a bunch of other questions we haven't gotten to. If I may, if we get these questions to you after the event by email, is it possible you could email responses back to the individuals that asked them?
For sure. And I'm throwing my email in the chat too. I can't promise a prompt response, but I can promise an eventual response.
All right, well, we'll do our best to try to get everybody's questions answered after the event. So we appreciate everybody's contribution to Q&A. Connie and Michael, great session. We really appreciate it. It was good content. I think, again, it begins to build upon the process the progress we're making today in these sessions. So we'll look forward to hearing from a number of people that were pulled together by the Farm Bureau in the next session. So we'll just sort of log off here and everybody can reconvene in the next session. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike, for having us. And thanks
Appreciate it very much.
Appreciate it. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.